Morning once again. I think this is the time at which we will begin. We saw our numbers were at 20, now we're 18. So before we start losing any more people, we'll get started with the session. And just for clarity's sake, this is a breakaway session that is being led by Dr. Abraham Rugo of IBP. And it's really want to look at the imperatives for financing of devolution, and BBI, as we all know, BBI is the basis of the discussion that we will be having. So we're supposed to have Peter Wanyama in this group as a discussant after the presentation. However, I don't see him in the group. So at this point, I'll just welcome you all, and I hope that we will have a fruitful discussion and just get us all to share our ideas on what we think about BBI, and particularly the issue around financing for BBI, the financing for devolution. So I'll ask that as the presentation is going on, you will please just, if you have any questions or comments, you could make use of the chat box to just try and put in your questions, and during the time at which is allocated for us to have a bit more discussion, then we will be able to see if we can handle and respond to some of those questions. So at this point, I'd like to just welcome Abraham Rugo, Dr. Abraham Rugo, who is the country manager at IBP, International Budget Partnership Kenya. It's a very interesting discussion that we are about to have. So I don't want to preempt much about the presentation, but just a brief about IBP. IBP is a Kenyan organization that focuses on budgets at all stages of the budget cycle, looking at the formulation stage, approval, implementation, and also looking at the audit stage. But mostly our key areas where we work towards is issues of transparency, accountability, ensuring the public participate in these processes, and also a big discussion which is starting to get traction around the country, which is around equity. So those are the 4 key areas where we work around. And this is also something that is very interesting to us. So without further ado, I'll just welcome Dr. Rugo to take us through the presentation on what he has prepared for us. And then so the presentation will take about 30 minutes, and thereafter we'll open it up to just have one-on-one conversations to seek clarity and see how we can proceed with this particular topic. Over to you. You're mute.
Found it. Good. Thanks a lot, colleagues, from wherever you are joining this conversation from. Please, Abraham and colleagues, if you could just confirm that you can hear me well. I would not want to proceed.
Yes.
Okay. And only realize that I've been talking to myself all along. So good. Now, we are starting a bit late. We basically about 30 minutes later than we had intended. My solace is that the discussion we have, if I could ask David Silakan to just mute your end, please. My solace is that Dr. Mutaha Kangu, my very respected senior scholar, did spend quite a bit of time on some of the things I will speak about, and therefore I will be more than glad that we spend more of our time here, basically in conversations together, because that then will make a difference. If you permit me just 1 second, I change my connection. It's a bit hazy. Just 1 second. Good. Is that better?
Yes.
Good. Sorry, it was getting a bit hazy. So thanks. So I'm going to be spending some time on the review of the BBI provisions on sharing of revenue. And I will go straight to my presentation. So the first question that we must always get ourselves back is, why did we decentralize? And there's been many reasons. And perhaps a way to pursue this conversation would be to make the yes or no answer as to whether, if these things have been achieved, then we need to think of a different way. And if none of this is being achieved, then we need to think about a framework that will help us achieve that. And it's on that basis that I'm going to be evaluating the BBI provision. First is that we devolved so that we can decentralize. We can move services from central points to the points of citizens at all parts of Kenya by both national and county government. So decentralization in principle is about making sure that services are provided at the point that they are most they are needed, but also at the point that it's most economical and functionally efficient to deliver them. The second one was separation of powers, where we argued that we needed people to check each other, to be able to create proper checks and balances between the executive and the legislative arms. And therefore, we needed that separation of powers so that the one approving the decisions is not the same one who comes to implement, and the same one who comes to audit, and the same one who decides whether the services will have good quality or not. Thirdly, we decentralize so that we can have a framework where structure follows strategy. In other words, where finances follow functions. That we have already established for ourselves what functions we need performed, and therefore what kind of finances and other resources, human resources, technical resources are necessary for that, and not the other way around. Not a situation whereby money first and then we ask, so what can we do with this money? And we talked about very comprehensively developed plans, both at the national level and at the county level, and being implemented. The fourth reason was to pursue a route of equity. We appreciated that we are in different contexts in different parts of this country, and therefore we needed to be able to make sure that we are treating different problems according to those problems, and not according to one universal system that fits all. And therefore we wanted Mandera to be, the people in Mandera to be able to decide what works for them and what does not work for them. The same to the people of Lamu and the people of the different areas. And finally, we wanted to institutionalize, in the real sense, public participation in the processes of the county governments as well as the national government. But here we wanted to make sure that public participation becomes a reality. But what is the current challenge? So if those are the reasons, and that resources, as I've said, point number 3 there, that finances were going to be a critical aspect of distribution, of making sure, as you know very well, that resources, finances are not an end in themselves, they enable the achievement. And part of even what BBI seeks to propose is to increase the criteria in Article 203 to make sure that the provisions in the Bill of Rights are actually considered in the distribution of resources. In other words, there is an explicit declaration. In other words, there's an open declaration of what we as Kenyans expect of our governments. And the resources, finances, both those that we have paid taxes and those that we borrow to fill the shortfall, should facilitate that achievement of that, so that they should facilitate the achievement of roads, the achievement of better education system, the achievement of better healthcare, clean water, and other services. But what is the current challenge? So the current challenge is that, first of all, the allocations to counties and for devolution are declining. And I will show in a minute what is happening. Secondly, we have a set of conditional grants that have been established by the national government. And just for reference, this is based on a memorandum that we submitted to the National Assembly and to the county, to the Senate during the Division of Revenue Bill for 2020-2021. And it was a joint memorandum of TISA, IBP, and ISPAC. They have a myriad of conditional grants, from Linda Mama program to user fee for gone, to conditional grants for level 5 hospitals that used to be provincial hospitals. But those conditions, the criteria of setting them is not clear, and there is actually, and therefore there's a bit of stagnation. There's also stagnation in the amounts, and we can show numbers that will do that. Thirdly, is that public debt, pensions, and other charges of the consolidated fund services are crowding out the amount available for sharing and haunting counties' allocation. What this means is that we have an increasing must spend line at the central that basically is reducing the amount, and I'll show the numbers in a minute on that. And fourthly, there is no clarity on financing of, for instance, the functions that have been taken over by the Nairobi Metropolitan Services from the Nairobi City County. But a bigger concern here that is very problematic is this a start of decentralization. I mean, in 1964, it was a bit more radical and open, but this could this be the way to go? So soon Kajiado County and Kiambu County are pushed to surrender certain of their services to the Nairobi Metropolitan Services, and it may go like that until finally there is no devolution anymore. And realistic revenue projection has negatively affected revenue sharing and expenditure clarity. This is both at the national level and at the county level. We have a challenge in terms of unrealistic. And finally, and of great concern to all of us here, is that the lack of transparency, accountability, and participation is affecting how resources are allocated and implemented. But a couple of numbers. What do we mean when I say that they're crowding out? So first, the first column you see there is how our public debt, and we have not added the numbers for 19, 20, and 2021, but they are not very different from there. So you see, I want to refer you to the growth in the percentages. So you see our public debt has been growing on average at 30%. In other words, public debt service, is important to clarify. Public debt service is the amount of money we pay every year for debt, for the debt that we have incurred at the national level. So we started with 250 billion in 2014-15. By 2018-19, it was about 690 billion. 2019-2020, it was about 780, if I'm not wrong. And this year, it's about 890, about 900 billion. And therefore, and you see the percentages, how they've been growing. 33%, 48%, 52%, on average 30%. Our shareable revenue, and this is basically the amount, the ordinary revenue. This is the collection we make from VAT, income tax, excise duty, and excise duty and imported duty, has been growing at an average of about 13% over that time. But you see the allocation to counties has been growing at an average of 10%. But as though that is not that notwithstanding, is that the allocation to counties is actually declining. So two things on this sheet. One is that we don't have a clear basis of how allocations to counties and to devolution should be. As you see in the third column, where you see 3-year average growth in ordinary revenue. First of all, the two columns, CRA and National Treasury, show that there has been a difference every year of how much what basis each uses to allocate. So 15-16, there was a concurrence. They both used 10%, 10%. In 2016-2017, CRA used the 3-year average growth in ordinary revenue at 15%. Treasury just given. So you see already there is a difference in terms of what we use, what is the basis. And by 2021, you see that National Treasury had no basis. Basically, they agreed at 0%. But what is important is that when you look at the growth in national ordinary revenue, after the National Treasury, you see up there is ordinary revenue, and then growth in national revenue. You see the percentages, how it's been growing from year to year. But then you look at the corresponding column of growth in division of revenue approved amounts, 15%, 8%, 8%, 4%, 1%, 0%. And this year we even have a 0%. But I dare actually make an argument that if you factored in inflation of at least 6%, then you have a negative 6% growth this year. So in other words, the money that you have provided, whereas the figures look the same, 316 and 316, if you factored in inflation, then you have less amount. In fact, even much less. Then you see equitable share as a percentage of shareable revenue. We are just above the 15%. all the years, it's just been roughly just slightly above 15%, 17% currently. And as I've said, if you factor in as well. Okay, so having presented that kind of picture, and I have left quite a number of numbers. I have left quite a number of figures because time will not allow me to go into them. But
yeah,
let's just hope. Let's continue.
yeah.
So the big question here is that do the BBI proposals move us to a solution? Which solution for what? Solution for this. So so does the BBI proposals, especially on revenue sharing, help us to deal with this challenge? Mutaha Kangu did speak to some of these things earlier. So 5 proposals are worth reflecting on. First of all, which audited accounts to use for revenue sharing, the 35% minimum allocation to counties up from 15%. Allocation according to population size, which is one can say is a famous 1 man, 1 vote, 1 shilling. I believe it's also 1 woman. The national provision for Ward Development Fund, and then the increasing of the independence of the OAG and role of Office of the Controller of Budget. So as we say, this is a progressive recommendation, as you know very well that we have been listing the changes on very old document, on every old reports, because the National Assembly basically delays, and therefore ensuring that so as long as the OAG has tabled has tabled in Parliament the accounts, the audited account, then it does not matter. It does not matter whether they have approved it or not. Then those documents should be utilized. Of course, there is an administrative process of making sure that indeed it is clear. It is clear which documents have been approved. I mean, have been tabled in the National Assembly, and ensuring that, because sometimes what we have seen is pure, sometimes impunity, where decisions that need to be made are made without consideration of the due process. What this will do, it will lift the ceiling of allocations to counties, even if that remains at 15%. What that? Sorry, there is. Are you able to see that table? Can you see the table now on the auditors?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is a table we did a simulation to say, suppose then we were to increase. So this is the second point. So the first point I've already made it about OAG. I mean the audited accounts. The second point is about, what about the minimum allocation? Suppose we were to increase the minimum allocation from 15% to 35%. Is it possible? Is it realistic? Is it sustainable? Those are the 3 questions that we need to ask. First of all, as we have rightly noted, that the problem with the minimum 15% is not the figure itself. There are other problems of accountability. There are other problems of delayed disbursements. There are other problems of how counties spend this money. But suppose we were to do that. Now, if we were to do that, then it means that in 2016, 2017, where we had given 140 billion, basically with 35%, we would have given 327 billion. Where we gave 302, where we gave 280 billion, then we would have given 327, 302, 327, and you see how the figures. So if we increase the figures, you see how the difference looks like. But let's take the example of 2019-2020, where we would have given 363 billion. I seem to keep losing my screen every time I move. So suppose we took the figures, and when I say, sorry, I keep going back to same slide. So suppose we were to work with 2019-2020 using the 35% allocation. Now, one of the things we need to be cognizant about, and the reality is that there's something we call fiscal space. Now, fiscal space is about how much flexibility do you have within your budget. Now, let's take the example of 2019-2020, which is a financial year that is already closed. and using 35%, assuming we were to allocate 479, 479.18, amounts as 35, so basically as what based on audited accounts. So public debt in that year, public debt would have taken 437.20 billion. Pensions, which is one of the fastest growing amounts in our budget, would have taken 89 billion. Wages, and this is the amount of money we spend for the different government officials, would have taken 449.93. Total is 976.73 billion. The ordinary revenue for that year was 1.5 trillion. And therefore, the total already up there, which is a must spend, would have taken 62% of the ordinary revenue. Now, if you work 35% using the latest available audited accounts, you would have allocated 479.18, which would have meant that the proportion of the allocation to the ordinary revenue for that particular year, for that financial year, would have been 30%. And the amount you would have been left with is 117 billion for everything else. So that raises the question of, is it realistic? Is it possible? And where exactly is the problem? Because if you are to use this, then it means that you have to get further into debt if you are to assure that 5%. But there's another conversation as to what is the sovereign conversation around the amount of debt that the national government has taken, and what is the gain for the different counties, so that then if the two were to cancel each other, then you would say then there is a reason to allocate less to counties, because after all, there is balanced development being pursued. What about per capita allocation? So per capita allocation is the third proposal, and I'm picking this broadly, which has to do with allocating resources according to the population, and ensuring that the county with the least does not get the county with the most does not get more than 3 times the county with the least. Now, this has an effect on small counties and marginalized counties, because, as you know, marginalized counties, take an example, Turkana, Marsabit, Lamu, whereas they have small populations, the demand and the cost of service delivery is very huge because of the kind of topography they have. Now, the assumption normally with this kind of line of thinking is that you have very small developmental differences between different jurisdictions of units of development, where units of development here are being the county for purposes of this conversation. Of course, as you will see in the next slide, there seems to be a thinking within BBI that the unit of development in this country ought to be the ward, and that even complicates things further because of the lack of spillover. And so, take a case in point: Turkana has 18 times the number of poor people as Lamu. That's a very wide gap if you think about it. And therefore, if you have a per capita proportion of 3:1, as I said, not more than 3 times, then you have a disadvantage on Turkana. And time could not allow me to just show you the numbers, how they look like. But basically, there is looking again at services. Counties that have got more people of certain services. For instance, an example is the early childhood development, which has got a huge, is a county function. And when you think about it, a county like Bungoma, that has 15 times the number of children enrolled in ACD as Lamu County, then you start seeing what that would mean in terms of service delivery. And then same applies for other services like roads, like water. And the reason why this mostly affects small counties like Lamu and Isiolo is due to that there are certain costs that are fixed. An example is that whether you are Lamu County or you're Nairobi County or you're Turkana County, each of you has to pay a governor whose salary is the same. Each of you have to maintain a county assembly whose salaries and asks are the same. In other words, there's a certain set of administrative costs that do not vary depending on the kind of population you have. And perhaps there's a conversation to be held on other ways of dealing with counties that have got huge populations or are more urban, and that can be pursued in that way. I must move fast. I see my time is running out. On one development fund, I will not belabor this. But this already, it's not new. First, let's start there. It borrows from the thinking around the county-wide equalization development fund that was introduced in the Senate sometime in 2018 by one Irongo Kangata, now majority whip. And what it tries to do is basically to create a standardized mechanism of what happens at the ward level. Now, if you were to ask us, this goes completely contrary to the spirit of devolution, because the spirit of devolution is about the jurisdictions to which power has been given, determining how they are going to spend their money and on what they are going to spend that money on. 5% that is being proposed here of the county government's revenue in each financial year is very different figures in Lamu County and very different figures in Nairobi County. You know, Nairobi County has a budget of about 30 billion. Lamu has a budget of about, I mean, you're talking of about 3 billion or thereabout. 5% of the two figures is very different amounts. And therefore, this broad brush kind of approach and a national one, it starts undercutting the very principle of decisions being made at the point where they matter more. And it will not achieve the allocative efficiency part of it. Because, for instance, the Ward Development Fund, as we have observed it, has even shifted the focus of county assembly members to only focus on the amount given to the award by these, and forgetting that there are a couple of billions being spent. It has done the same at the national level with the national government constituency development fund. So this, we think, is contrary to the spirit of devolution. There are many ways and mechanisms. We think that the best way forward is for a cross-county mechanism of ensuring equity across board, so that places where they don't have roads get roads, those that don't have healthcare get healthcare, and at the end everybody gets development. And finally, OAG here, there's not much comment to make, is to say that empowering the Auditor General to recruit his own staff is a great move, but that's not where the problem is. The problem is that there's been a lot of control by Parliament on the resources going to the Auditor General's office. Over the last 7 years, the amounts have been the same. Over the same period, the national government budget has more than tripled. We have more institutions that need to be audited, and the Auditor General's office has to audit all these institutions. How do you expect the resources to remain the same, even if you are to hire more staff? Based on what? If your budget still remains the same. So the problem being fixed here is not necessarily the actual problem on the ground. The problem on the ground is for the Auditor General's office budget to be assured and perhaps be determined not by the National Treasury, which is the institution that gets audited, but rather by another body that is higher than the National Treasury. And there are examples in other countries where the budgeting responsibility is in another office and separated from that of the National Treasury for purposes of removing that conflict of interest. And finally, the role of control of budget. Now, the role of the control of budget that the proposals being made is to amend the Act to require the control of budget to carry out due diligence on all ongoing projects to ascertain whether money previously approved for the project has been utilized prudently. Now, that's a job of the Office of the Auditor General. Two, before even it gets to the Auditor General, can you imagine the thousands of projects by county governments and national government that are running right now? And if the controller of budget was to make sure each of them, the money is being spent prudently. Now, mark the word prudently here. This is not just going and seeing whether the project is alive or not. It's going even to the accounts and to analyze and to see, and the tendering process and all that kind of thing. Before they approve the next tranche, what kind of a mess? First, logistically, it is impossible. It is not within the mandate or the capacity of the OCOP to be able to take this responsibility. Who has failed should be the bigger question. Does it mean that actually county assemblies have failed in their oversight role? The audit committees, the internal audit function within counties and within the national government has failed. If that is the case, then we need to fix that problem. And then in that kind of a context, then what do the county assemblies and national assembly do? So where do we go next? I don't have a verdict on BBI. I have presented the issues as they are. Mutaha Kang'u even said more, but because of time, I needed to limit this to a bit. We think that without a commitment to accountability, then all proposals will still fall flat. Accountability is a big problem. The minimum 15% that goes to counties, where is it spent? How is it spent? What is it achieving? The 85% that is remaining at the national level, about 80% from our analysis. How is it being spent? For what is it being spent? What is the prudence there? If that is not taken care of, if there is no stopping point to greed and impunity, then it doesn't matter what kind of proposals we have, they will all fall flat, because we think the problem is not necessarily financial. It's it's an impropriety kind of challenge. True. Secondly, development is about trade-offs. You cannot have everything. You have to choose one against the other, because you will always have unlimited needs, but you have limited resources. And that is the responsibility of the National Assembly and the county assemblies to be able to say, yes, this is a good direction to go, but we must make a trade-off. We cannot continue borrowing until finally we cannot pay even ourselves. A person who is borrowing and just getting more into debt requires more help than financial management. Needs to decide much more, other things they're spending their money on, right, and the like. And finally, politics need to apply a realistic view of development based on the resources available. I have shown you the picture of the fiscal space. And if we had time, I could have shown you how that fiscal space is actually shrinking over and over again. Thank you very much, Abraham. Sorry, I have taken, I think, 7 more minutes. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hugo. So we've all had an opportunity to just hear from on the presentation. So we're supposed to have a discussant, Peter Wanyama, but who's unfortunately not part of the meeting. So I'll just take advantage for us to have more time to just engage on in the process. So I'd like to just open it up. If you'd like to ask a question or any comments, please feel free to just share either in the chat box or just raise up your hand. If you have any comment, you can raise up your hand or just alert me in a way so that I can give you a chance to speak or make your comment or question. And I also request, if you're speaking, kindly, if possible, just turn on your video so that we can get to see who is asking the question or the comment. So please feel free. We've heard clearly, and I think from the introductory remarks by Dr. Mutaha Kangu, there are some things that he mentioned, and we've also seen that being emphasized in this particular presentation. So yes, this is your opportunity to just ask any questions. So we'll take them down. If you have any questions, feel free.
Maybe I can go first.
Yes, Kibet.
Thanks, Dr. Abraham, for very elaborate analysis of the implications on financing devolution. I concur with the red flags that you are raising, and more so on that issue of the two issues on the practicality of the 35%, given the current fiscal space, and now more so for the issue of also Ward Development Fund, because that's where we work at the county level. So I don't know what is the spirit of this, because at one point we're saying we want to strengthen the Office of the Control of Budget, adding more roles, and at another we want to confuse county assemblies to implement to include an implementation role, the Ward Development Fund. So I don't know. I think the best we could do at the county level is strengthen citizen and also county assembly oversight. My proposals, and I guess again the Ward Development Fund contradicts the separation of power provisions in the Constitution. So I don't know whether the BBI, I have not seen any part that proposes to amend the Constitution to address that, because we need to learn from the court battles that have been there. TISA, ZGG, and a couple of other organizations have been really fighting the battle of promoting that principle of separation of power, especially the case study of CDF. So I don't know what and I guess you've really pointed out, even if we had the World Development Fund, it would not make so much difference for counties that are marginalized, and because of the discrepancies in terms of even the budgets, the budget's amounts. So those are my few comments for now.
Thank you very much, Evans Kibet. Anyone else who has a comment? And I'd also request that as you start making your comment, please tell us which county county you are you're joining the meeting from, so that we can just have a feel of the differences. David, can see your mic is unmuted. Do you want to?
Yes, hello.
David.
Yeah. Thank you, Abraham.
Okay.
Actually, for that nice presentation. Yeah, mine is just, I'm David Diko from Machakos County. Yeah, and mine is mostly, I'm very much concerned with this public debt because it is eating so much in our location. Is there a clause we can be inserted in the DBI to arrest this ever increasing public debt? That's actually my big concern. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Maybe we could take maybe one more. Thank you that for public debt. Any other comment, or maybe yes, Humphrey Burrell, I can see your hand up. Humphrey, please unmute your mic and just proceed.
Thank you very much, my brother. Calling from Kakamega. Of course, I'm so impressed with the presentation, the way my brother Rugo was able to share a lot of information regarding issues to do with financing of devolution. And in this particular case, we're also referring to BBI. My small one is actually on the kind of provision, I don't know whether it could be there, that speaks to issues that, or rather what can be done to address issues revolving transparency and accountability, because again, we see it as a challenge, a challenge to financing of devolution. So do we have any specific provision that speaks to addressing transparency and accountability of this process? Yeah.
Thank you, Humphrey. So I think maybe, Ruko, if you could just take those for now, and then as the others just think through the next set of questions. So Dr. Rugo, please go ahead.
Thanks, Abraham. It's having worked in this space for quite some time. Of course, I read the BBI report and any other proposals for constant amendments and changes with a huge pinch of salt. And therefore, because I come from, my team and I, and Kibet is also involved in part of this work and conversations, are approaching this from a point of practical reality. And some of the problems that we have right now with financing have very little to do with legal frameworks and constitutional frameworks. I can submit that to you. Let me just show you an example. Allow me to just share something here, Abraham. So this is based on a memorandum that we sent to the National Assembly and Senate. The numbers you see there is how much has been allocated for conditional grants. Now, the figures are important because this is the conditional grants that have been allocated. Now, I want you to pay attention to line number 3. Can you see it? Compensation for user fees forgone. Abraham, you can see it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Now, from 2015 to 2016 to 2020, we've been allocating 900 million every year for reimbursements for people who go to access health services at the county level, at the dispensary level. Honestly, have the numbers that have been going to those health facilities remained the same? Have even the number of facilities remained the same to warrant you to allocate the same amount? And our analysis has even shown that a lot of this money is either disbursed late or does not even get there. But then all of a sudden you come up with a least medical equipment scheme, line number 4, and you allocate it billions within no time. 4.5 billion, 4.5 billion, 4.5 billion, 9.4 billion, 6.2 billion, 6.21 billion. Yet, as we know, that equipment is actually not being used. Most people, their point of access of health services is the dispensaries. Now, I've shared that, and we can share that report. It's actually available on our website, to say that the problem we seem to be having is a problem of impunity. And members of the county assembly now want money that they can control, because then they forget about the governor. The governor can do whatever he wants to do with his money, so long as they have some money allocated to their. Now we have so many affirmative funds that we have created all over the place. So the separation of powers principle, Kibet, that is already provided for. There's nothing more you can do about it. Humphrey, the provision on transparency and accountability, save for the criteria of of where they have managed to handle corruption. The mechanisms for transparency and accountability, I think Kenya has one of the most elaborate mechanisms. Why are they not being? Perhaps the solution is in public political pressure to make sure these things are happening. So there's no provision per se, save for the one that provides within the criteria, and this is the amendment that is being proposed on Article 203. This is page 69 of the BBI report, where it introduces a criteria, the need to eradicate corrupt practices and wastage of public resources, which basically talks about accountability. But the question we need to ask is, why hasn't there been accountability? Is it that the framework is weak, or there is just no willingness to apply that framework? David from Machakos, what can be done about public debt? Now, as I said, the problem of public debt is here with us. Sadly, it's here to stay because we have continued on an expansionary budget without an equivalent expansion of revenue collection and ordinary revenue. So we've just been growing our expenditures and without an assurance of where we will get our ordinary revenue from. Is there a time in a country where a country has to spend quite some money in advancing development? Yes. The question that we still cannot answer is where so far we've procured close to 7 trillion in debt from about 1.5 trillion 6-7 years ago. Where has that money gone? Now, our GDP, or our total worth as a country, is estimated at about 10 trillion. Now, friends, when you inject 5.5 trillion, the equivalent of about 50-something% of that amount in an economy, the changes you should be seeing should be massive in every sector. Question is, do we see that? Instead, what we are seeing, we are hearing everywhere is about billionaires, COVID billionaires, road billionaires, SGR billionaires, and all this. So the question about debt is not that debt is bad. Every country in this world, okay, most countries, let me not say every country, most countries have to incur debt. But there's a question of, is the money going where it's supposed to go so that it advances development? So that then we can say, it's like when you take a debt to build a house and you're already inside that house and enjoying its benefits. So even as you go through the pain of paying that loan, at least you can see. But imagine a situation whereby you are paying for a loan and there is no complete house that even is habitable. It's a loss in every way. If you think about it. So that's the first one. The second thing around debt is that our debt is becoming increasingly commercial and therefore increasingly very expensive. And time will not allow me to go to some of those charts, but we can provide. We just did a paper. John Kennedy and myself just published a paper on the state of public debt, and just said we are between a rock and a hard place on the debt, because we must continue to incur some more debt to be able to advance, because our budget as is currently, unless it's halved. This year, our budget is 3 trillion. We can only collect, God being so gracious to all of us, 1.5 trillion, meaning 50% of our debt, 50% of our budget, we have to borrow for us to be able to pay that amount. So that's a challenge. And this is where I say that the accountability by government is critical for us to be able to ensure that we can engage. Thanks, Abraham, for sharing the memorandum, because it has a lot of the information I have just shared. And our website also has a lot of these documents, including the paper I've just talked about on debt. So the last point I wanted to say is that we need to investigate also and have a conversation, a national conversation, on who exactly is failing. You might have had the question I asked Mutaha earlier, is what is the problem? What problem are we trying to solve? Because if the problem is that those who have been given the responsibility of ensuring that there is accountability and oversight are not performing, having many or more of them is simply increasing the problem. But happy to hear other comments and thoughts from other people, how they see this and what they think can be done about the situation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rugo, for shedding more light on the questions that were asked. So I've also been monitoring the chat box, and yeah, we appreciate the comments. So I see Derek requested for the memo. We've shared it, and as well as the paper on public debt, which Dr. Rugo has referred to. I'm also, for David Ndiko, I'll share that as well. So at this point, I'll also just thank you, Rugo, for just shedding more light on the questions that were asked. I think we still have a bit more time for more deeper engagement, and I'm seeing we are 21 in this group. So please just feel free, raise your hand if you'd like to seek clarification from the presentation made, or if you just have a comment that you'd like to share. I can see Chris Owala, your hand is up, so please unmute your mic and go ahead and ask your question. Chris.
Thanks a lot. Okay, thanks a lot. Mine is on supplementary budget, which negate the aspect of public participation has been done. You realize that again, and the budget is juncture, so that as we also are engaged, we also put in our demand so that we protect the budget. And again, the money follow functions, but in most cases, you realize even if you look at the healthcare, a lot of money still remains in Nairobi, yet the healthcare is devolved. What can be done so that we make sure that as we move to the next level of strength and devolution, we make sure that appropriate costing is done so that we don't just throw money in hourly. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And maybe just to clarify, the first part of the question we didn't quite hear you clearly, but what I was able to pick was you were talking about supplementary budgets versus the issues around public participation. Hugo, did you get the question correctly? Okay.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, sawa. So before I ask you to respond, any other person who would like to seek any clarification on any piece of a presentation or ask? Yes, Peter Rono, unmute your mic and proceed.
Thanks, Abraham, for moderating the discussion, and thank you, Rugo, for the wonderful presentation. Indeed, your presentation was well elaborate, and it really captured a lot of concerns that we had concerning the devolution. Mine won't be a question, but just a comment concerning all these proposals. Often we have seen our country having wonderful ideas, proposals, and legislation, but we always lack goodwill to implement them. So as Rugo was talking about, who is the problem? Yeah? I think also we need to look at the issue of the political goodwill. At what point are we supposed to discuss about the goodwill in terms of implementation? That is one. Number two, about the independent offices, that is the Auditor General and the COB. I think also I'll have to bring the CRA into that. I wish if they could have sum it up so that it's not just about giving out recommendations and so that the other person can act on them. I wish these offices could have been strengthened in terms of financing, in terms of having a certain authority, rather than relying on a third party. And sometimes they rely either on Parliament to enact, of which these are the same people who, again, don't have the goodwill. So we might have good intentions, we have good proposals, we have good feedback, but again, they still hindrance in terms of realizing that. So I wish they could have strengthened the independent offices to discharge their mandates, and would have realized a lot in terms of accountability as well as prudent use of public resources. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rono. Any other question before we question the comments? Okay, I can see one from the chat from Derek. So Rugo, I'll just read it out. Derek is asking, is saying, I have a question for Dr. on the economic cost of BBI, especially given Kenya's very expensive elections. It's not so clear how much has been spent and how much will be spent. Yeah, should the cost of a referendum or value for money play a huge role in constitutional reforms?
Okay.
Did you got that?
Yeah.
Okay. So
perhaps I could
take those,
yeah,
and then we can, we'll wait
so,
for the next round. Go ahead.
Of course, part of my expectation in coming to this conversation was the kind of line Peter has taken, where we actually converse. You know, we often discuss, but we never get to the point where we are able to converse on exactly what do we want for this country, how do we want it, and therefore I'm keeping myself from responding, but more to contributing to a conversation, because I don't have solutions to some of these. What about supplementary budgets? Yes, one of the expectations of a constitutional framework, and some of you may have heard about the UK that does not have a constitution per se. It has a couple of laws, but it does not have an overarching constitution yet. Nothing gets lost. So countries' constitutions are made with an assumption, a big assumption, that the people who are going to be implementing them will be rational and reasonable at the point of implementation, because you cannot legislate everything. You can't. In fact, reading through the BBI initial sections, And then you come to, so the initial sections include the report of the task force. You may want to pay attention to it. The issues raised by that report have very little to do with anything you can legislate. Because they talk about moral values, morality of the society. They talk about the need to be patriots, the need to, to build together. But the building together seems to be assumed as a responsibility of the next person, not me. Me, I can take as much as I want from the system, but the rest of you should make sure that the system is functioning properly. And that's where you find this overreach on use of supplementary budgets. I mean, last year, there was last financial year, we saw one of the most ridiculous thing ever happen when a supplementary budget was tabled in the National Assembly on 24th of June, 6 days. And the 6 days included a weekend in Parliament. When you're tabling a supplementary budget 6 days to the end of a financial year, what are you saying? You're simply saying, I'm trying to rationalize what I have already spent. I'm trying to readjust lines. But also is to say that supplementary budgets have not served the purpose that they are supposed to serve. Supplementary budgets were supposed to course correct for any eventualities that were unforeseen. But now they have become the mechanism of reorganizing the budget to the budget that was initially desired. This other one has to go through public participation, has to go through many eyes. But then the supplementary budget is now used to panel beat the budget to what those implementing it. That was not the intention. That is not the spirit of supplementary budgets. Supplementary budgets are for course correction where unforeseen circumstances have happened. And that's an overreach, which basically, as you say, waters down on public participation. But when you water down public participation, you simply say you have no respect for the people and their constitution and the mechanisms that they have put. It's true, finances are not following functions. I mean, I can say that for a fact. A lot of functions are still left at the national government level. The process of doing any form of functional analysis or costing has been frustrated, even when it's still an idea. And that's the battle we are having. You saw the kind of stress we had during the approval of the third formula for revenue sharing. That will not go away because no county can tell you whether the money they receive is enough or is not enough from a very factual basis. Because even them, they have not done the proper cost of delivering health services within their county, or water services, or agriculture. Cost of reforms, thanks, Derek. I don't have an answer to this. Because the reforms, the elections, everything are anticipated as a common and normal process of governance. But when normal processes of governance take an economic angle, where it's about who will get tender for printing of ballot papers, who will get tender for the biometric equipment, and why do I ask? Because at the end of almost every election, the last 2 or 3 cycles, we have had cases and scandals about how the money was spent, which tells you that there was a problem that is economic in nature. So the election was not the focus. It's almost like it's a bait of getting, or the pipe for getting the money out of the system. Anytime that happens, then you lose purpose. Other countries do referendums. Countries are always doing referendums. Nordic countries are always doing referendums, even for the most of ridiculous of things. I think the one that caught people's attention was the recent one of legalizing marijuana. I forget the country. I think that it was a referendum question, the one that Italy voted to reduce their size of their parliament. All those are referendum questions. Do they cost the way they cost here? Probably not, because a governance process. It's the same thing about public participation. Why does it get costed for? In that sense. So I don't know how much we have spent so far on the BBI. I keep hearing different figures. I heard it was 10 billion. The other day I heard from the doctor saying 14 billion. I actually don't know how much has been spent. And how much, of course, there's been a discussion which I think is being held in a different breakout group of the constitutionality of BBI and whether it's actually a public process. But that is a discussion for another day. My point is that every process of governance comes with a cost, but the cost should be commensurate to the benefit that will accrue to the citizens, and not the other way around. There shouldn't just be a cost that basically has no benefit. Thanks, Abraham.
Okay, thank you very much, Nico, for just helping us just understand this topic further. And at this point, I know we may have others who have questions, but we see we have just about 10 minutes left. And before we close, I think it would be very good to just hear. We've talked about a lot about the issues that we are picking out, but at this point, I'd like to just open it up to everyone and just try to hear some of your thoughts really on how do we move forward. And I know in most cases we've tried to not really so much as to take a position, but in terms of just presenting the evidence as it is. So I think for me right now, I'd really want to just open it up to everyone to just hear what do you think is our role, if at all we have any role about BBI on this whole discussion about BBI. So this is just an open space to just have a conversation around that. Any comments on what is our role? What should our role be, if at all we have any role to play, beyond just having these discussions where we present the evidence? We've had a lot of discussions, and I'm sure we all have access to social media, to the news, and there's a sort of narrative that is being sent out. But from an evidence-based perspective, what are some of our comments, and what do we think should be our role on proceeding with this?
Abraham, I can go first.
Yes, okay, Kibet, please.
On my video. So I think today's discussion gives us an idea on where we start. I guess listening to conversations on media and these other spaces where we sit in these kamukunjis, this kind of information is not there. So there is a lot of, what do I call, I think people are just rallying on either sides, BBI or against, without this information. So as actors in the space, I think we need to take this information to people. And I think somebody had said if we could have, if the presentation cannot be shared, we can have a paper, position paper for the civil society organization on especially the budget implications. So I think for us let me speak for myself, and I guess for other actors who have structures like we have in Baringo County Civil Society Network, the Nakuru County Civil Society Network, the Kericho CSO Network, I can see representatives here. Or they could have this information, they can inform the conversations. Because now we can't decide for people who will make their own decisions, but how I wish they make informed decisions. Yeah.
Thank you, Kibet. I think that's a good place to start, where we are saying, a lot of the conversations that we are having, as Kibet says, in the communities, wherever you congregate with your people, most of the discussions that we've had seems to be from what we are consuming from social media, from the mainstream media. But does it really have the facts? Are we conversing on the facts? So I think he's bringing out a very important point on how do we ensure that this information is actually out there, so that people are making decisions based on evidence, which is really a good place to start. So thank you very much, Kibet.
Abraham?
Yes, Peter Rono, please.
Yes. So I'd like to build on what Evans has already mentioned in terms of reaching out to the networks and taking position. But I think also to add more weight on this discussion, we need to also provide a linkage between the BBI and the livelihoods. I think that one would be better understood at community level, like what Rugo has mentioned today or has shared with us. How can we link that information? What is the implication to common people livelihoods? Because I know that one will resonate well with the community and all the actors. And I think in line with that also, we as civil society actors, we need to simplify this information further, make it very easy for community members, because as much as we are targeting civil society organizations, but also we need to have mind of common wananchi, just to see how can they understand this information with ease. So if we could simplify the information, like the way this is the gap, these were the issues that being addressed by the DBI, and then what does this mean for a common wananchi, so that from there people can easily make their own decision based on the information that is there. So I think that that works for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Rodo. Dr. Rugo, is there anything you'd like to speak as we look out for any other person who has any other comment to make?
I think one of the democratic tenets is deliberation, public deliberation of policies and proposals, because there's nobody who has a monopoly of ideas in terms of what should happen in the country and even at the county level. And therefore, for me, I am of the same line as Mutaha. There's nothing like saying this thing is closed, and only available for editing. We're not going to edit. We have to engage, and I think my way forward for this is a conversation about what is good for this country necessary? Yes. We have to constantly have that conversation, because even decisions, even 5 years to come, things change. Societies do change. I mean, if last year I had told you that we will have a conference like this on Zoom where all of us are joining from wherever and meeting and having, you would have told me you're a madman. How is that even possible? How can people meet on a screen? But honestly, 200 of us are joining this morning for a conference on a screen. What am I saying? We must constantly evaluate and assess the proposals and the ideas as to whether they are still relevant, as to whether they are still functional, as to whether they are still cost effective. And we must not stick to one thing simply. And that's the second, the same thing that devolution espouses. Devolution espouses that the people of Kericho sit down among themselves and decide what works for them. That's why when you hear about examples across the world, there are countries that have a form of devolution, whether federal or unitary kind of devolution framework. Germany, US, Nigeria may not be a very good example, but different countries. You go to the different of those states, they are also different. They pursue very different policies. They work on different ways. There are those, if you want to really pursue certain careers, you move to certain places. If you want other sports careers, you move to other places. The point I'm trying to say, devolution did not create a situation whereby Kericho and Kisumu are competing to be equal, to be the same, but rather to achieve growth through their diversity. So for me, I think the conversation, the public deliberation side of our development agenda and goal cannot be sacrificed, whatever the case. And this is beyond BBI. It's about the daily decisions being made by government officials who have the public trust to provide services, because they are not doing it as a favor for us. They are doing their job, which they are paid to do. So for me, I think I just wanted to emphasize that point of public deliberation is critical, regardless of which choice finally people make. It's not within my powers to decide whether there should be a referendum or not? If it was, I would have said there is no need for a referendum, because I think some of the things, some of the problems that we are trying to solve are not what we are trying to propose. We can have as many layers of policies and laws, but if we are not willing to abide by those policies and laws, then it becomes a challenge. It becomes a big problem. You can drive the best car in the world, but if you don't put on a safety belt, when you hit a tree, that might be the end of your story. At least we learned that from Princess Diana's experience. It doesn't matter. So if we are not willing to abide by the rules we have set for ourselves, then why set them? Abraham, thanks. I see we have a minute and 50s.
Yes, thank you very much, Fugo. And yes, it's true. We have a meeting. I'm just on the side talking to the Zoom admin, and I think we've all learned how powerful these people are. So he said as soon as it clicks, the time runs out, we'll automatically be moved to the room. So I'd just like to thank everyone for being having this conversation. But I mean, we still have the opportunity to add. If you have any thoughts that you think are still important, you'd like to share, please use the chat function. So you can just add your question there. We will sort of just try to capture all the questions. We've been capturing them and all the comments, and we will, at the end, I think when the report is being submitted, then you be sure you will receive everything. So we have 1 minute left. Anyone who has any final thoughts that they'd like to just share? Anyone who wants to say any final comments? Okay, so just to thank you very much for cooperating and for just the rich discussion that we've had. And I believe this is not a conversation that will end here, and we will continue engaging further. So we'll also feel free to reach out to us if you need any further information around the public debt or any other, or anything that came out from the presentation that you'd really want to see to get further clarification. Please feel free to reach out to myself. So I'll just type in my email address in the chat box and feel free. If you really need further information, we'll be happy to share that with you. So thank you very much for being such amazing participants, and we'll see you on the other side.